This video provides a brief discussion on how treaties are applied in international law and how the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties is used to interpret international treaties. Article 2 of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties tells us what treaties are. They are agreements between states which give rise to international rights and obligations and are governed by international law. It's important to know what a treaty is according to Article 2 of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, because treaties can have various names, including a charter, a protocol, a memorandum of understanding, a constitutive document, an agreement, or a convention. So what is the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties? The Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties is a treaty that prescribes the law applicable to written treaties. Importantly, it only applies to written treaties and not verbal treaties. There are three categories of treaties, namely bilateral treaties, treaties between two state parties, multilateral treaties, treaties between more than two state parties, and constitutive treaties, which are treaties that establish an international organization or international court. Article 7 of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties tells us who can sign and therefore bind a state party to a treaty. There are two categories of persons. The first are people who present full powers which authorize them to enter into the treaty on behalf of their state. The second category of people are people who can enter into a treaty by virtue of the office that they hold and do not need full powers to enter into treaties. And they are heads of state, heads of government, ministers of foreign affairs, heads of diplomatic missions, and accredited representatives of states. A state can express their consent to be bound in three ways. Firstly, simply by signature. Secondly, by signature and ratification. And thirdly, by accession. As a further explanation, ratification requires that a treaty pass through a state's parliament and be signed into domestic law before that state is bound by that treaty. And accession involves a state party who joins the treaty later than the date in which the treaty entered into force. According to Article 84 of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, a treaty can come into force in two ways. Firstly, it can come into force on the date stipulated in the treaty. And secondly, it can come into force once the requisite amount of states required by the treaty have ratified it. In order to be able to rely on the provisions of a treaty before a United Nations organ, that treaty must be registered at the Secretariat of the United Nations in accordance with Article 80 of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. This brings us to the end of your first video on treaties. The next video on treaties will address reservations to treaties. Thank you for your attention.